Hello everybody, welcome to another video. In this one we're taking a look at the thrusting swords in Dark Souls 2. This class of weapons is extremely strong. Genuinely, when I was getting the footage for this, I was surprised at how much damage the weapons that are pretty low on this list were still doing to enemies in high NG pluses. When I read the stats of the weapon, it will be with a character that has 50 strength and dex and the Ring of Blades +2. But anyways, let's get right into the list. So coming up first, I have put the Spider Silk. The reason being is this rapier is a boss weapon, which means it takes Petrified Dragonbone to upgrade. However, one of the things that makes rapiers so very strong is the 140 counter damage, which the Spider Silk does not have. Now, this weapon has shield piercing strong attacks, which is pretty good, but unfortunately it only has 30 durability. There's another weapon on this list, it's the next weapon we'll be looking at. That one also has shield piercing strong attack and it has more durability than the Spider Silk. Also, it has 140 counter damage. So I'm not quite sure why they decided to put this thing in the game. You can actually get another weapon from the same soul of the Duke's Dear Freya instead of this one. Now let's move on to the next one because I'm going to continue to compare it a little bit to the Spider Silk. So the next one is the Mailbreaker. This one can be found very early in the Forest of Fallen Giants, and I was surprised when I was getting gameplay with it how good it was at poise breaking enemies with a lot of armor. Now, having 140 counter damage genuinely makes it do some significant damage early on in the game, especially against enemies who are weak to thrust. Because rapiers genuinely take very little amount of stamina to use, they are an excellent choice against bosses. Now, this thing is a little bit shorter than the Spider Silk, but they weigh the same, and this has 45 durability, as well as 140 counter damage. So at 50 strength and 50 dex, you will only be doing 300 damage. But when you're fighting with this weapon and you have the proper ring setup, it certainly does a lot more. Also, the stats to wield are not very high, at 5 strength and 12 dexterity. Anyways, let's move on to the next one, which is the Chaos Rapier. This weapon upgrades with Twinkling Titanite. You can get it from straight as you make your way to Huntsman's Copse. However, you do need 20 intelligence and 20 faith to talk to him. It weighs 1.5 units, 45 durability, 10 poise break, 140 counter damage, and at 50 strength, 50 dex, as well as 20 intelligence and 20 faith, you will be doing 420 damage. I always like to mention that when weapons have elemental damages, the info screen reads that they have absurdly high damages, but that is not really the case when you play with them against enemies who will mitigate some of that damage with their armor. This thing is kind of the rapier that does fire damage, so it can be combined with a build that has high intelligence and faith, kind of giving you a choice. If you want to use a rapier and you also want to be a hexer or a pyromancer, you totally can. It does come with 13 intelligence and 13 faith to wield. I don't tend to use this weapon very much because there are some insane rapiers as we get higher and higher on this list, but we'll get to that. Let's move on to the next one, which I have decided to put the Black Scorpion Stinger. This thing has no scaling, so you just need the stats to wield it, and I have mine infused with Raw. It takes 10 strength and 18 dexterity, weighs 2 units, 30 durability, no counter damage, and because of the no scaling, you can just get 10 strength and 18 dexterity. You will be doing 395 damage with 115 poison buildup plus your scaling. With my character, I was doing 395 damage with this weapon, not counting the poison buildup. Being a rapier, it doesn't consume a lot of stamina. It can make a viable poison weapon in certain scenarios, especially because you can get this thing generally before you get the Manslayer, which is another relatively light weapon that poisons enemies. But yeah, it doesn't have too much durability, and it also upgrades with Twinkling Titanite, which does not help its case whatsoever. Anyways, let's go to the next one. Up next, I have Ricard's Rapier. I have to say, I really like the fact that they seem to have put a lot of work into the design of these rapiers. A lot of them look really good. So Ricard's Rapier is a bit of a special weapon. It weighs 2 units, has 45 durability, which can be a lot or little depending on how you use it, 10 poise break, 140 counter damage, and at 50 strength and dex with the Ring of Blades, you will be doing 365 damage. So this thing has a special attack, which, if I'm not mistaken, I believe it hits 9 times. That should be enough to poison most things in the game. And if you catch players off guard in PvP with this weapon, same story, you can poison them incredibly fast. Now, though this weapon doesn't have anything that would make you think that it would be good with poison, aside from the 9-hit combo, it is one of the better weapons to use for poison buildup. You can simply bring this with you, for example, to a boss fight, poison the boss really quickly, and then switch to your primary weapon. Since this weapon only weighs 2 units, it can easily be used as a backup weapon. The Engraved Gauntlets is another option with this rapier. they can be really good. They have a small chance to give you a 15% damage increase in any of the hits, so they tend to be good paired with fast hitting weapons. Also, Ricard's rapier does upgrade with regular Titanite, which is a little weird because it is unique. You find it in an iron chest and you can only get one per playthrough. However, it does require 25 dexterity to wield, and it has an S scaling index, which can be quite high in the early levels. That's it, let's go to the next one. Next up on the list, I've decided to put the S stock. The S stock comes in at 3 units, 45 durability, 20 poise break, which is the average for longswords, 120 counter damage, and at 50 strength and 50 dex, you'll be doing 368 with a ring of blades. This thing unfortunately isn't one of the more useful rapiers, even though it has incredibly long reach and a little bit of a different moveset. It also has shield piercing strong attacks, which makes it quite viable if you have something like a Havel monster hiding behind his shield in PvP. The slash attack can be good for multiple enemies, and if you two-handed, you can do a parry with it as well. That is the case with all of the rapiers. So the next 3 weapons on this list are quite strong, so you can use pretty much any of them and be very well off. At number 3, however, I've decided to put the Espada Ropera. You can get this in Dragon Lake Castle after, I believe it's defeating Nashandra or the Giant Lord, one of the two, and talking to the ghost. This is one of my favorite looking weapons in the game. Absolutely amazing. It weighs 2 units, has 80 durability, which is fantastic, 10 poise break, 140 counter damage, and at 50 strength and 50 dex, you will be doing 378 damage with a Ring of Blades +2. This weapon has a parry attack with one hand, so you can use it in your offhand and use it as a parry weapon as well as a fast striking weapon. It has one of the highest damages out of the rapier class, and this goes for pretty much the other 2 rapiers that I have yet to talk about. But you can certainly use these weapons as backup weapons to just quickly finish off your enemy if he has low health left, or if you start to run out of stamina in a fight and there's a lot of pressure on you. But yeah, this weapon is great. So coming in at number 2. Now, I have to say that, like I mentioned before, number 3, 2, and 1 can pretty much all be interchangeable depending on what you prefer. But I put the rapier at number 2 because the number 1 weapon has the potential to do a ridiculous amount of damage for a weapon class that is so light. So reading through the stats of the rapier, it weighs 1.5 units, has 45 durability, 10 poise break, 140 counter damage, and at 50 strength and dex, you will be doing 373 damage. Now that is only a little bit less than the Espada Ropera, and you can get this weapon very early on in the game. So what isn't there to say about this weapon? It only has a B scaling in dexterity, but it doesn't really matter. It still has one of the higher damages and one of the higher potential damages when you start combining it with things like the Ring of Blades and the old Leo ring. It only takes 5 strength to wield, so you can easily wield it with one hand. 12 dexterity, that is not high at all. This rapier is just incredible. The thing about it is that it doesn't consume a lot of stamina. When you two-hand it, you can easily stagger many things in the game. And if they are too big to stagger, you can certainly put on the stone ring. Now the weaknesses of rapiers in general is that they don't do very well in crowd control. But because this thing pokes so quickly and it does so much damage with its pokes, you can quickly roll out of any dangerous situation and continue poking. The fact that you get it so early in the game and it does comparable damage to weapons that are 10 times heavier than it with the counter damage just makes it a weapon that is impossible to overlook. It is probably the best weapon to use against bosses in the whole game, and it's pretty much every speedrunner's favorite weapon to use as well. You can power stance the rapiers because they don't weigh much and they don't have a lot of stats to wield either, but I do think the meta way to play with them is probably to two-hand the weapon. You can parry with it as well, but another weakness of it is the critical damage. I mean, it can have everything, but the most effective way to fight in Dark Souls 2 is to kill the enemies quickly, and this thing is one of the best weapons in the whole game to do this. Now, given that the stats to wield are so low, and that you can get it pretty much before every other rapier in this game, it does kind of make the other rapiers useless, except for maybe the last 3 on this list. Oh, and Ricard's rapier, I think there is a use for that weapon to poison things if you happen to be a build that has a lot of dexterity, which you probably will be if you're playing with rapiers. But yeah, let's talk about the number 1 weapon, because the same things do apply to that one. So at number 1, I have put the Ice Rapier. This is pretty much another weapon that needs no introduction. You get it in the Crown of the Ivory King DLC by the enemies that wield it. And going through its stats, it weighs 1.5 units, has 50 durability, 10 poise break, 140 counter damage, and at 50 strength and 50 dex you'll be doing 363 damage with it. Now this thing does a little bit less damage than the normal rapier, but if you make a build that caters to this weapon, you can do more damage than you can with the rapier. So when you infuse this thing with something like a Feint Stone to take advantage of the special attack damage, and you put on the Sorcery Clutch ring, the Ring of Blades, the Old Leo ring, and Flynn's ring, which shouldn't be that difficult because these weapons are quite light. If you do the special attack with the Engraved Gauntlet and it happens to be a counter attack, and on top of that you throw the fact that this thing has bleed on it, I swear someone must have fallen on their keyboard when they designed this weapon, because a weapon that weighs 1.5 units has no business doing upwards of 2000 damage, like, ever. So yeah, this thing can also be power stanced, and it has one of the longest reach for the rapier class. It does upgrade with Twinkling Titanite, but I think we can give it a pass on that, because it is one of the best Twinkling Titanite weapons that you can upgrade and play with. The stats to wield the Ice Rapier are a little bit higher than the normal rapier, but since you're going to be getting this later on in the game, most likely anyways, it's not a big deal. But yeah, I would say just be careful playing with these weapons because they may ruin your experience with everything else that exists in the game. So yeah, rapiers are amazing. They're a weapon class that takes advantage of counter damage, and they do thrust damage as well, which just coupled with the Leo ring is insane. I've talked about counter damage before because it tends to be the case that the best weapons in a class are the ones that have high counter damage, and the way rapiers are designed to take advantage of counter attacks just makes them completely overpowered, honestly. The fact that these weapons don't weigh anything either, so you can put them in your build and not really worry about it, gives them a lot of versatility as well. I guess if you're fighting these things in PvP, one thing you could do is have a shield against them, but then again they have rapiers in its class that have shield piercing strong attacks, so there's just no way to escape the relentless poking of the rapiers. Anyways, that was all for this video. Thank you very much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.